following is a discussion I had with ChatGPT in which we explored several related topics: grace, the law, once saved, always saved, the atonement, and the role the law now plays in the life of a Christian. This is not a discussion about legalism. In fact, it argues the opposite. The conversation examines how the law can remain morally valid while no longer functioning as the basis of our relationship with God. Obedience to the law does not earn us a right standing with God. Instead, the law describes what love for God and neighbor looks like in real life. It serves as a guide that helps believers align their lives with that love. In this way, the law continues to instruct and correct us without placing us under a system of earning favor with God. One of the reasons this discussion is necessary is that the subject of the law is often misunderstood. Some people associate the law with legalism, the idea that a person must keep God's commands perfectly in order to earn salvation. Others react against that by minimizing the importance of obedience altogether, concluding that grace means behavior no longer matters. Both approaches miss an important distinction. The law does not establish our relationship with God, but it still describes what love for God and neighbor looks like in practice. The Spirit can use the law in two ways. First, to convict us of sin and show our need for reconciliation with God, and later, to reveal places where our actions are inconsistent with the life we intend to live as believers. In this sense, the law does not create the relationship but helps guide and correct us within it. All these thoughts are mine. Chat is merely a tool for compiling them in an understandable manner. There will be multiple episodes that show how our conversation progressed, and the ways Chat's presuppositions and normative Christian vernacular are more precisely defined to better express the truth of how God works in our lives.
Okay, let's get into the discussion.
This is sort of off the cuff, but I was thinking about law and grace and about what Harry Kahn was saying in his video number 10. I wish I could give you that transcript. The basic idea is that when you live under the law itself becomes the reason for your obedience. You do these things because the law says to do them. And your motivation is either that you want the benefits and rewards or that you want to avoid the penalties. Conversely, if you are living under grace, the law still applies, but it is no longer the reason why you act the way you do. Instead, your ultimate intention has changed so that you now live for God. The law, rather than being the reason for your actions, now becomes the description of how you carry out that ultimate intention.
What you are describing is actually a fairly coherent moral framework, and it lines up with a number of distinctions that theologians and philosophers have tried to articulate when discussing law, motivation, and moral agency. Let me restate your idea in a clearer form so the structure becomes visible. First, under a law-centered framework, the law functions as the primary motive. The individual acts because the law commands something, and the law carries consequences. The motivation is therefore external. A person obeys because they either want the benefits promised by the law or they want to avoid the penalties attached to disobedience. In that sense, the law is not merely guidance. It is the driving force behind the behavior. The logic is essentially, the rule exists, therefore I must comply. Second, under a grace-centered framework, the situation is different. The law itself does not disappear. The moral content of the law still describes what a good or righteous life looks like. What changes is the reason for acting. The ultimate intention shifts. Instead of acting because the law compels compliance through reward or punishment, the person acts because they are oriented toward God. The motivation becomes internal rather than external. In that framework, the law is no longer the cause of obedience. Instead, it becomes the description of the life that flows from the new intention. It shows what love, loyalty, or faithfulness toward God looks like in practice. The logic becomes, I am living for God. Therefore, my actions take the shape that the law describes. This distinction can be framed philosophically in terms of external versus internal motivation. Under law, the law is the motivating force. Behavior is driven by reward and punishment. The relationship is regulatory. Under grace, the ultimate intention is directed toward God. The law describes the pattern of life that results. The relationship becomes relational rather than regulatory. Another way to say it is that the law shifts from being the engine to being the map. It still outlines the terrain of moral life, but it is no longer the power that drives the person forward. That is actually close to how many theologians explain passages like Romans 8 or Galatians 5. The issue is not whether moral commands exist. The issue is what produces the obedience. If obedience is produced by fear of penalty or desire for reward, that is the logic of law. If obedience flows from a transformed intention toward God, that is the logic of grace. Your observation about ultimate intention is the key conceptual move. It explains how the same moral instructions can exist in both systems while functioning differently. The commands remain the same, but their role changes. Under law, they function as coercive rules. Under grace, they function as the outward shape of a life oriented toward God. That is a sharp and useful way to frame the distinction, and it removes a lot of the vagueness that often surrounds the phrase, not under law, but under grace. If you want, we can also do 2 additional things that would sharpen this idea even further, right? We could compare this framework with how Paul describes the law in Romans and Galatians to see whether the structure fits his argument. Or we could translate your idea into a short, clear explanation you could use in a talk or video, since the concept of ultimate intention versus descriptive law is something most people have never heard articulated explicitly.